Okay, middle class parents of adult children, I'm gonna need you to really understand something for me. Your children are not middle class. I think a lot of us are realizing that the middle class no longer exists, but I think that it's especially hard, even if you understand this on a mental level, it's really hard for parents in America to reckon with the fact that even though they did everything right, even though they made it into the middle class and they have a strong resume, they're hard workers, they've done everything right, and they did everything right to give their children everything that they thought that their children needed. Unfortunately, your children are doing worse than you. And again, that may not be news to you necessarily, but let's think about the implications of this. As the middle class does not exist anymore, and many of your children are actually living in poverty, middle class rules of success, how you're supposed to handle yourself as an adult, how you're supposed to manage your time, your resources, your money, how you're supposed to budget, and that sort of decision making that worked for the middle class is not the same logic that people living in poverty are going to need to follow. One thing that comes to mind is the fact that people living in poverty don't always have the luxury to make smart financial decisions. People living in poverty don't have the luxury to be able to think long term about financial. A lot of long-term goals that are quite literally on hold for people in. It's also a privilege to be able to take risks, to be able to learn from your mistakes. If you don't have an emergency fund, then you have to be strategic in a certain way that people with safety nets don't necessarily need to do. One example is credit cards. I know that you're supposed to pay off more than the minimum balance in your credit card. I've always known that. My middle class parents taught me that. What do you do if your expenses are beyond your income? You're gonna need food. God forbid an emergency happens. What are you gonna do when your car breaks down? Just as most of us know, and a lot of middle class parents probably taught you, that a payday loan is a major scam. Most of them have never been in a position where they needed to take one out. Now, I haven't taken one out. I'm not speaking on that, but I'm comparing that to credit cards in the sense that everybody wants to make smart financial decisions. When you don't have enough to meet your basic needs, you start to look at things differently and think about the difference between an actual need versus a want, and also versus a should. Like credit scores, for example. A credit score is not real. It is made up. It is a should. You should have a good credit score. However, the need for shelter and food, not a should. That's a need. So to be able to make the decision between a should and a need, I'm gonna prioritize paying myself before I pay the banks. Because I am a person who's alive and I have physical needs. A bank printed out money, signed it, whatever, gonna give me a number. Are they going to die if I don't pay them on time? Or am I going to die if I don't get food? This is the sort of logic that if you do live comfortably in the middle class, you're able to follow the rules. You're able to follow the shoulds. You don't have to think between a need versus a should. Just as it was likely easier to distinguish the difference between a want and a need. Now, I just want to say I know the middle class is dying for everyone. and a lot of middle class parents of adult children that I'm talking about here, a lot of you, you're seeing this in your bank accounts too. You're seeing that you can't afford the vacations anymore. You're seeing that, you can't afford eating out nearly as much. I don't think that a lot of middle class parents realize that their adult working class children have never been able to eat out, have never been able to go on vacations, because you think we're middle class too, and we're not. Sorry, mom and dad, if you're watching this, I love you, and I know that you get it to a strong degree. But this is just a PSA, because I think that as the economy gets worse, we're gonna need class solidarity. And that means that all of us who are working class people, even if you make over 100K, if you don't have a backup plan, if you were to lose your salary, you are working class. You don't own capital. If you trade your time for money, you're working class. And we gotta stick together here and recognize that a lot of the way that we would play the game, a lot of those financial rules are no longer as advantageous for us in the younger generation in particular. I'll tell you, I'm someone who always got good grades, always did what the teacher said. I always pay my payments on time whenever I have the money. And I'm telling you, it's really, really hard for me to give a fuck about a credit score right now. I wish I could. I wish I do. That's just the reality that we're in right now. We're gonna need class consciousness and solidarity amongst the working class if we want to create a better economy that works for us and meets our needs. And hey, even maybe even allows us a few luxuries here and there. And there's just a lot of disillusionment going on right now, because especially a lot of people in older generations realizing that you've worked your whole life, you've put a lot of hard work, hoping that if you had a good credit score, if you paid into your 401k, if you were a good worker, hoping that that would be enough. A lot of Gen X right now is having to pay for their elderly parents and their adult children, even though they did everything right. So I'm not saying to dwell in what we can't change, but I'm saying get angry if it makes you empowered, and move through the disillusionment and the shame that makes you feel like you could have done more. Because a lot of your adult children who are struggling with time management and resource management are under-resourced. And we've recognized that there is no winning. So we're gonna have to be creative, and we're gonna have to work together.